The day my brother stood up at my mother's birthday dinner and thanked me in front of everyone for saving his life. I had already spent 3 weeks reading the evidence that he had been laughing at me behind my back. Let me back up. My name is not important. What is important is that I am the oldest of 4 children, and I am the one who stayed. Stayed in the city, stayed near my parents, stayed in the role that nobody officially assigns, but everyone silently expects the oldest daughter to accept. I was the one who drove my mother to her appointments when her hip was bad. I was the one who organized the holidays, who remembered the birthdays, who called my father every Sunday, even when I had nothing to say, and he had even less. I was the reliable one, the steady one, the one who did not require anything from anyone because she was too busy making sure everyone else had what they needed. And then there was Marcus. Marcus is my youngest brother. He is 5 years younger than me, which means I was old enough to remember the day he came home from the hospital. I remember thinking he looked like a very angry potato. I remember feeling immediately protective of him in a way I could not explain. That feeling, that particular warm and irrational protectiveness, is exactly what he learned to use against me for the better part of a decade. I want to be precise about what happened, because this story is not a simple one. It is not the story of a monster. It is the story of something more complicated and, in some ways, more painful. A person who learned that vulnerability was a tool and who used it so skillfully that the people who loved him most could not tell the difference between his genuine pain and his performance of it. Marcus had a real problem once. That part I want to be clear about. When he was 23, he developed a dependency on prescription painkillers after a sports injury. It was real. The pain was real, the spiral was real, the 2 hospitalizations were real. I was there for all of it. I took time off work. I sat in waiting rooms with bad fluorescent lighting and worse coffee. I listened to him cry at 2 a.m. when the withdrawal made everything feel like the end of the world. I held his hand through the worst of it, and I did not let go. He got clean. He went through a residential program. He came out the other side looking thin and tired, but genuinely himself again. And I remember standing outside the facility on the day he was discharged and thinking, we made it. We actually made it. That was 6 years ago. What happened after that is the part I need to tell you carefully. For the first year after his discharge, everything seemed fine. Marcus got a part-time job. He attended his outpatient sessions. He called me regularly, and the calls felt real, felt like my brother talking to me, rather than a version of my brother performing recovery for an audience. I believed in him completely. I still believed that year was genuine. The shift was gradual, so gradual that I cannot point to a single moment and say, there, that is where it changed. But looking back, I can see the pattern assembling itself, piece by piece. The way you can only see a mosaic clearly when you step far enough away. It started with money, not large amounts. 100 here, 200 there. His rent was short 1 month. His car needed a repair. He had a copay for a therapy session he could not afford. Each request came wrapped in just enough vulnerability to make refusal feel like cruelty. He had a way of framing things that made you feel that saying no was not just unkind, but actively dangerous, as though your hesitation might be the thing that pushed him back toward the edge. I gave him the money, every time. I told myself it was an investment, that I was helping him build stability, that once he was on his feet, once things leveled out, the requests would stop. They did not stop. By the 3rd year after his discharge, the amounts had grown. $500 became $1,000. $1,000 became $2,000. The reasons became more elaborate. He was in a new therapy program, an intensive one, and the insurance would not cover it. He had relapsed briefly, just briefly, and needed to go back to a step-down program for a few weeks. He was working with a specialist who charged out of pocket, but was, according to Marcus, the only person who truly understood his particular case. I want you to understand how convincing he was. He had the vocabulary of recovery absolutely mastered. He knew exactly which words to use, which emotions to perform, which moments of apparent self-awareness would disarm skepticism. When he told you about his struggles, he looked you in the eye. His voice broke at the right moments. He expressed gratitude that felt specific and sincere. He referenced things you had said to him months earlier. as though your words had stayed with him, as though you mattered to him in a way that was permanent and real. He was extraordinary at it. I say that without any admiration. But I want to be honest. He was genuinely skilled. The thing that finally made me stop and look directly at what was happening was not a dramatic moment. It was a Tuesday afternoon in November. I was sitting at my kitchen table, paying bills, and I was short. Not catastrophically short, but short enough that I had to make a choice between paying my own dental bill and making the transfer Marcus had asked for that morning. He had texted me at 7:45, before I had even finished my coffee, asking for $800 for what he described as an emergency co-payment for a crisis intervention session. I sat there with my laptop open and my coffee going cold, and I thought about my tooth, which had been bothering me for 2 months, and I thought about the fact that I had been putting off that appointment because I kept telling myself I would go after things settled down. Things had not settled down in 3 years. I transferred the money, but something had shifted. A small, quiet thing, but real. I called the clinic he had named in his text message. Not to check up on him, I told myself. Just to understand the billing process, to see if there was a way to pay directly so the administrative burden was off Marcus. The woman who answered was polite and professional. I gave her Marcus's name and date of birth. I explained I was his sister and that I was trying to assist with a payment. She looked him up. She was quiet for a moment. Then she told me, very carefully, that she was not able to discuss the details of any patient's account with a third party, but that she could confirm that the clinic did not have an active file under that name. I asked her to check again. She checked again. No active file. I thanked her, and I sat very still for a long time. The coffee was completely cold by then. I did not call Marcus. I did not text him. I went back to paying my bills, and I paid them all, including my own dental appointment. And I sat with what I had just learned in a way that felt like holding something very hot and trying not to drop it. I want to be clear about what I did next, because I think this is the part that matters most. I did not react. I did not confront him. I did not tell my parents, or our sister Diane, or anyone. I made a decision that I was going to understand the full shape of what was happening before I said a single word about it. I went back through my bank records. I keep meticulous records, always have. It is one of those habits that comes from being the responsible one for so long. I printed out 3 years of transfers to Marcus. I organized them by date and by the reason he had given for each one. Then I went through my messages and my emails, and I matched the request to the amounts. The total, over 3 years, was $41,260. I read that number several times. I had given my brother $41,000, and I had believed every single time that I was helping him survive. I started making calls, quietly, methodically, over the course of about 2 weeks. I called every clinic and every therapist he had mentioned by name. I called his insurance company, identifying myself as his sister, trying to coordinate care. And I asked general questions about what kinds of programs were typically covered. I was careful. I was not accusatory. I was just gathering information. What I found was a pattern so consistent, it almost felt organized. The programs he had described either did not exist under the names he had given, or had no record of him, or were facilities that charged a fraction of what he had told me. One residential program he had claimed cost him $4,000 for a 2-week stay, turned out to charge $1,100. He had asked me for the $4,000. I had given it to him. Then came the voice messages. I need to explain how I got them. Marcus had a friend named Teo, someone he had known since high school. And Teo had a younger sister who was in the same yoga class as my friend Priya. This is the kind of small city social overlap that people underestimate. Priya knew, in a general way, that my brother had been through some difficult years. She had heard me talk about it. She did not know the specifics. One evening Priya called me, and she was awkward, in a way that told me immediately she had something uncomfortable to say. She told me that Teo's sister had mentioned something to her, and that she was not sure whether to pass it along, but that she thought I should know. Teo had shown his sister a voice message Marcus had sent him. In the message, Marcus was laughing. He was describing me. He called me, and I am going to quote this directly, because I think the exact words matter. He called me the most useful idiot he had ever met in his life. He said I would believe anything as long as it came with a little crying. He said, and this is the part that took me the longest to process, that the recovery story was the best investment he had ever made because it kept paying out years after the original event. Teo's sister had saved the message because she was uncomfortable with it. She gave it to Priya, who gave it to me. I listened to it once. Then I saved it to 3 different places. I want to tell you what I felt when I heard my brother's voice saying those things. I want to be honest about it, rather than performing a clean emotion for the sake of the story. What I felt was not rage, though rage came later in smaller doses. What I felt first was a particular kind of grief that I do not have a precise word for. It is the grief of realizing that the person you were protecting was never the person you thought you were protecting, that the relationship you were maintaining was not a relationship at all, but a transaction you had not consented to, that your love had been identified as a vulnerability and systematically exploited. I felt that for about 2 days. I let myself feel it fully, because I knew that if I did not, it would come out sideways later. Then I made a folder on my computer. I labeled it simply with the date I had started collecting information. Into the folder went the bank statements, the clinic records, the insurance documentation, the notes from my phone calls, and the voice message. I also did one more thing. I texted Marcus and told him I was proud of how far he had come and that I was looking forward to seeing him at Mom's birthday dinner in 3 weeks. He responded with a heart emoji and a message that said I was the best sister anyone could ask for. I read it and I thought, yes, I know you think that. My mother's birthday dinner was always a production. She is the kind of woman who says she does not want a fuss and then is visibly disappointed if the fuss is insufficient. Every year, we did dinner at her house, the whole family, which meant me and my husband Daniel, Marcus, our sister Diane and her husband, and our parents. 7 people around a table that was slightly too small, eating food that was slightly too much, having the same conversations we had been having for 20 years. I had decided that this was where it would happen. Not because I wanted to ruin my mother's birthday. I want to be clear about that. I chose this moment because Marcus had chosen it first, though he did not know I knew that yet. 2 days before the dinner, Marcus had called our mother and told her that he was doing so well that he wanted to make a special toast at the dinner. He wanted to thank the family for their support. He told her it would mean a lot to him. My mother called me afterward, delighted, and told me what a wonderful young man he had become. I understood immediately what he was doing. He was reinforcing the narrative. He was going to stand up at that table and perform gratitude and recovery in front of the whole family, which would make any future doubt about him feel like an attack on his progress. It was a preemptive move, and it was smart. What he did not know was that I had already spoken to Diane. Diane is 2 years younger than me and 3 years older than Marcus. She's practical in a different way than I am, sharper at the edges, less patient. When I showed her the folder, she was quiet for a very long time. Then she asked me 2 questions. She asked how long it had been going on. I told her. She asked whether I had told our parents yet. I told her no, and I told her why, and she agreed with my reasoning. Diane had also, it turned out, given Marcus money, not as much as I had, but enough. She had believed the same stories, had been moved by the same performances. When she realized this, something in her face went very still and very cold, and I recognized it because I had felt the same thing myself. We made a plan together. It was not complicated. The best plans rarely are. The night of the dinner, I arrived early to help my mother set the table. I brought wine, which I always do, and a small almond cake from the bakery she likes, which she pretended not to be pleased about and absolutely was. The table was set with her good dishes, the ones she only uses for family occasions, white with a thin blue border that I have been looking at my entire life. I set out the glasses. I folded the napkins. I felt very calm. Marcus arrived 20 minutes late, which was typical. He came in with a bottle of wine he'd clearly grabbed from a gas station, based on the price sticker he had not fully removed. And he kissed my mother on both cheeks and told her she looked beautiful, which made her laugh in the way she always laughed when he said things like that. He hugged me. He held on for a second longer than necessary and said, quietly, that he was really glad I was there. I told him I was glad too. We sat down. Dinner was my mother's roast chicken, the one she has made the same way for 40 years, with roasted potatoes and a salad that was technically optional, but that everyone ate because refusing it felt like a comment on her effort. We talked about ordinary things, my father's new hobby, which was woodworking, and had resulted in several slightly uneven cutting boards that everyone in the family now owned, Diane's older daughter's school play, a neighbour's renovation that had been going on for what seemed like geological time. Marcus was charming throughout. He laughed at the right moments. He asked my father questions about the woodworking and listened to the answers with apparent genuine interest. He complimented my mother's chicken twice. I watched him, and I thought about the voice message, and I ate my chicken, and I waited. After the main course, before the cake, Marcus stood up. He held his glass, the gas station wine, and he looked around the table with an expression of practiced emotion. He said he wanted to take a moment, if everyone would allow him, to say something that had been on his heart for a while. My mother was already looking at him with that particular soft attention she reserved for moments she wanted to remember. He talked for about 4 minutes. He talked about his struggles, using the language of the recovery, with the fluency of someone who had spent years studying it. He talked about how close he'd come to losing everything. He talked about the family's support, and he looked at me when he said it, directly at me, with what appeared to be genuine love and gratitude. He said, "I would not be here without my sister. She never gave up on me. She gave me everything I needed to get back on my feet. I owe her more than I can say." My mother was crying quietly. My father had his jaw set, in the way he does when he is moved but does not want to show it. Diane was looking at the table. Everyone started to raise their glasses. I said, "I appreciate that, Marcus. I actually wanted to talk about that too." Something shifted in his face, just slightly. A small recalibration, like a camera trying to refocus. I said, "I have been doing some thinking about the support I've given you over the past few years. I wanted to share some of that with the family, since we are all together." I had printed everything out and left it in my bag by the door. I got up, and I got the folder, and I came back to the table and I sat down and I opened it. I said, "Over the past 3 years, I transferred Marcus a total of $41,260. I believed it was going toward treatment programs and therapy. I want to show everyone what I found when I started looking into those programs." Marcus said my name. He said it in a low, warning tone. I kept going. I went through the clinic records first. I explained each one clearly, without drama. This program does not exist under the name he gave me. This one has no record of him. This one charged $1,100, not $4,000. I put the documents on the table as I went through them, face up, so everyone could see. My mother had stopped crying. She was very still. Marcus said, "This is not the time or the place for this." I said, "You chose the time and the place. You stood up and made it about me, specifically. I am just adding some information." Diane said quietly, "I gave him money too. I want everyone to know that." I also believed him. Marcus looked at her, and something in his expression changed. The charm was still there, but it was working harder now, visibly straining. He said, "You're both misunderstanding what you are looking at. Those records are incomplete. You do not have the full picture. I can explain all of this." I said, "I know you can. You're very good at explaining things, but I want everyone to hear something first." I took out my phone. I had the voice message queued up. I had thought about this moment many times, whether it was the right thing to do, whether it was too much, whether there was a version of this that was more private and less painful for everyone at the table. I had decided that the answer was no. Marcus had chosen the public moment. He had used it to cement a story that protected him and made it harder for anyone to question him. The only way to undo that was in the same space where it had been built. I played the message. My brother's voice filled the dining room, the room where we had eaten 1,000 meals together, the room with my mother's good dishes, and the white plates with the thin blue border that I have been looking at my entire life. His voice was relaxed, almost jovial, and he said every word exactly as I had heard it before. The most useful idiot he had ever met. would believe anything with a little crying. The recovery story was the best investment he had ever made. When it ended, the room was completely silent. Marcus did not say anything for a long moment. He was looking at the table. The charm was gone. What was underneath it was harder to read, and I found I did not particularly want to read it anymore. Then he started talking. He said the message was taken out of context. He said he had been in a bad place when he sent it, that it did not reflect how he actually felt. He said Teo had always been a bad influence, and that whatever version of the message I had heard had probably been edited or distorted. He said that the money I had given him had genuinely helped him, that the programs were real, even if the paperwork was hard to track down. He said that I was humiliating him in front of our parents on our mother's birthday, and that I clearly had issues with him that went back much further than this, and that we needed to talk about that privately. He said a lot of things. He kept talking for several minutes, and with each sentence, the story shifted slightly, the explanation adjusted, the framing changed. It was actually impressive, in a technical sense. He was very good at this, but nobody at the table was nodding anymore. My father, who was not an expressive man, and who had been sitting very quietly through all of this, said, "Marcus, stop talking." Marcus stopped. My father said, "I want you to go home tonight. I want you to think about what we have heard. And I want you to understand that this family is not going to have this same conversation again." Marcus looked at my mother. My mother, who had been crying quietly again for the past few minutes, did not look up from the table. He left. He did not take the gas station wine. Nobody spoke for a little while after the door closed. Then my mother got up and brought out the cake. She set it on the table, and she sat back down, and she looked at it, and she said very quietly that she wished she had seen it sooner. I told her that he was very good at what he did, that it was not a failure of love or intelligence to have believed him, that he had worked very hard to be believable. She said, "I know. That is the part that breaks my heart." We ate the cake. It was a good cake. The bakery she likes has been making the same almond cake for 30 years, and it is reliably excellent. And I ate my slice, and I looked at my mother's white dishes with their thin blue border, and I thought about the fact that I had sat at this table my entire life, believing that love meant you did not keep score, that you gave without conditions, that the measure of how much you cared was how much you were willing to absorb. I had been wrong about that. Not about love, but about what love requires of you. Love does not require you to be endlessly available for exploitation. Love does not require you to ignore evidence. Love does not require you to protect someone from the consequences of their own choices, especially when those choices involve lying to your face while you hand over money you worked for. I had confused love with a kind of helplessness, and Marcus had understood that confusion better than I had. In the weeks after the dinner, several things happened in the concrete, practical way that real consequences tend to happen. Marcus called me twice. The first call, 2 days after the dinner, was an attempt at the familiar approach. Emotional, apologetic, referencing our shared history, suggesting that what had happened at the dinner was a misunderstanding that we could work through together if I was willing to be open. I listened. I did not argue. I told him that I hoped he was well, and that I was not going to give him any more money, and that if he wanted a relationship with me, it would have to be built on something other than what we had built it on before. He said, "So you were just cutting me off?" I said, "I am changing the terms. That is different." The second call, about a week later, was shorter and angrier. He told me that I had destroyed the family, that our mother was devastated, that what I had done at the dinner was vindictive and cruel, and that he had been genuinely trying to recover, and I had taken that away from him. He said I had always needed to be the hero, and that this had been about my ego, not about truth. I let him finish. Then I said, "I hope you find actual help. I mean that." I hung up. He did not call again. Diane and I talked a lot in those weeks. We compared notes, not just on the money, but on the years of small moments we had both reinterpreted in light of what we now knew. The way he had always seemed to know exactly how much to ask for. The way the crises had a rhythm to them, appearing reliably when one of us had recently had something good happen. A raise, a bonus, a positive milestone, as though he had been monitoring the right moment to make a withdrawal. The way he had played us against each other in small ways, telling Diane that I was worried about him, telling me that Diane thought he was doing so well, keeping us each slightly more invested and slightly less likely to compare notes. It had been a system, not a conscious, cold, calculated system, maybe. I have thought about this a lot. I do not know how much of what Marcus did was deliberate strategy and how much was a kind of instinct, a learned behaviour that had developed because it worked and kept working. I do not know whether there is a meaningful difference. What I know is the outcome. My parents took longer to process everything. My mother, in particular, went through a period of trying to find an explanation that preserved some version of Marcus as a victim. She asked whether he might have a different kind of addiction, whether he needed a different kind of help, whether the family had failed him in some way that had led to this. These are not unreasonable questions. I sat with her, through them. I did not tell her she was wrong to ask them. But I also did not pretend that the answers to those questions changed what had happened. My father, in his quiet way, made his own decision. He told Marcus, in a conversation I was not present for, but that my mother described to me later, that he was welcome in the family as long as he was honest, and that honesty meant not asking for money, not performing recovery, and not treating his sisters like resources. He said it without anger, apparently, in the same tone he uses for everything, the same tone he used the day he showed me how to hold a hammer, the same tone he used when he handed me one of his slightly uneven cutting boards and told me it was solid even if it did not look it. Marcus, according to my mother, cried during that conversation. Real tears, she thought. She might be right. I have no way to know, and I have had to make peace with the fact that I will never be entirely certain which of his emotions were genuine and which were performance, and that this uncertainty is something I have to carry rather than resolve. What I do know is what I changed in myself, and this is the part of the story that I think matters most, more than the confrontation, more than the evidence, more than the moment his voice came out of my phone at my mother's birthday table. I learned to attach help to truth. This sounds simple. It is not simple. For someone who had spent their entire adult life operating on the principle that love meant unconditional support, learning to make support conditional was genuinely difficult. It felt wrong at first. It felt like a betrayal of something I had believed about myself and about what kind of person I wanted to be. But I came to understand that unconditional support is only a virtue when it is given to people who are not using it as a weapon. When someone has demonstrated that they will exploit your openness, continuing to be open is not generosity. It is something closer to self-destruction. Dressed up in the language of love, I now ask questions before I give. Not suspicious, interrogating questions, but real ones. I verify what I can. I pay directly when I can, rather than transferring money that can go anywhere. I check in with Diane before making decisions about family support, so we are not being managed separately. These are small changes. They are not dramatic. They do not make for a particularly exciting story, but they are the actual victory. Not the moment at the table, not the look on Marcus's face when the voice message played, not the fact that he walked out and left the gas station wine sitting on my mother's sideboard, where it still is, because nobody wanted to touch it. And my mother, in her particular way, has not thrown it out either. The victory is that I stopped being the most useful idiot he had ever met. I still have the folder on my computer. I have not deleted it. I am not entirely sure why. Maybe because it is proof, not for anyone else but for myself, of what I saw and what I did about it. Maybe because on the days when I feel guilty, which still happen, I can open it and remind myself of what I was actually dealing with. My mother's blue bordered plates are still in her dining room. We still have dinner there. Marcus has come twice in the past year, both times without incident, both times without asking anyone for anything. I do not know what that means. I do not know whether he is genuinely different or whether he is recalibrating, waiting for the right moment, letting the story settle before he tries a new approach. I sit at that table and I eat my mother's chicken and I watch him and I feel underneath everything the same thing I felt the day he came home from the hospital as a very angry potato, something warm and irrational that I cannot fully explain. I just do not let it make me blind anymore. That is the difference. That is the whole difference. The coffee on my kitchen table that Tuesday morning in November, the one that went cold while I made the phone call that started everything. I think about it sometimes. Such a small thing. A cup of coffee going cold, while I learnt that my brother had been lying to me for 3 years. I did not even finish it. I poured it down the sink and made a fresh cup and sat back down and started making my list. Sometimes the most important moments of your life look exactly like that. A cold cup of coffee, a phone call that takes 4 minutes, a number on a bank statement that you have to read twice before it becomes real. And then you decide what you are going to do with what you know. I decided to see it clearly, to document it carefully, to wait for the right moment, and to tell the truth in the same room where the lie had been performing for years. I do not regret any of it. Not the confrontation, not the voice message, not the look on my mother's face, which was painful, but which was also, underneath the pain, a look of finally understanding, something she had been trying not to understand for a long time. Not even the grief, which is still there, quieter now, but present. The grief of the relationship I thought I had, the grief of the brother I thought I was protecting. I let myself feel that grief because it is honest, and honesty, I have decided, is the only foundation worth building anything on, even if it takes a cold cup of coffee and $41,000 to learn it.